here we go. Welcome to the NFL Strategy Show. Dave Lock, let me turn this light on. Dave Lockren and my man Chris Spags. Breaking down a little bit of ownership today. We got the first run of ownership projections. We'll take a look at the chalk, pivots, fades, you name it. We got it all for you this week. We also got Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, the sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. The only place where you can become a baller also. The only place with $175,000 NFL baller. Got some great NBA contests tonight if you wanted to jump into that. You don't have the patience to wait until Sunday. 35K NBA ball. They're actually moving the prize pools upwards, 5K to first, $10 entry. You got CSV uploads and edits now, and you can get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports rewards points when you deposit through us at awesomemode.com. It's very simple. All you have to do, go to awesomemode.com, click on really not any of them, but most of the free article links, and you will find the Yahoo link in there at the bottom. Generally speaking, the ones that EMAC does, like, okay, go to NBA and then articles, cash building blocks. EMAC wrote it. It's free. You should read that. It's for NBA today. And if you scroll to the bottom, you will see it right there. Yahoo link, click it, sign up, use the sign-up code AWESEMO, AWESEMO, and when you deposit, get up to $30 in YSRPs. Those Yahoo Sports rewards points, they're as good as cash to be used on the site to play and win real money. Why pass this up, Spags?
I mean, why would you really? If they are as good as cash on that site, I mean, that's what you're looking for in life. And as the poet Skilo once opined, he wishes he could be a little bit taller. He wishes he could be a baller. If you wished you could be a baller, now you could actually do it. Unlike Skilo, you don't have to just throw your wishes up into the air and hope something comes down for you. And he didn't get taller either. So you could actually be a baller. So take that, Skilo.
There it is. Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, sponsor of the NFL Strategy Show. All right, Spags. So we've got ownership to take a look at, and as the daily disclaimer is every Wednesday, this is subject to change throughout the week. But a couple of interesting ones to discuss. At the top, you've got some of the usual suspects, but we've got another 13-game slate. And next week, because NFL's only running one Saturday slate this week, which is kind of cool because it's 3 games, and I love that. But the first thing that jumps off the page at me, and we'll jump around a little bit today. We don't need to go position by position. We'll also go beyond the numbers with Chris Spags towards the end of the show. Sacrum Barkley right now projected for the highest ownership of anyone on this slate. And honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if that holds throughout the week. The thing at this point is, like, can we place faith in this guy? He looked somewhat explosive last game, Monday against the Eagles. Made a couple nice plays. Eli Manning missed him on some easy dump-offs that would have gone for 10, 15 yards. But I mean, we haven't gotten the good Sacrum Barkley game now in how long? Like before the injury? I don't looking over what we've seen from him. He doesn't have a 20 fantasy point game since week 8, and he has only one 20 fantasy point game since week 3. Since he's played 8 games over that span. Like, is this the game where Barkley finally does it? Or is it fool's gold just because they're facing the Miami Dolphins?
I mean, so look, here's one thing that gives me some hope, and it's something that Alex has mentioned on content too, including our On the Contrary show. But he's talked about how Sacrum Barkley, when Daniel Jones came in, that he expected Sacrum to be a bit less valuable. I don't think he would have expected perhaps this much of a downturn, but thought that Jones's mobility in the pocket would make it so there's less checkdowns for Sacrum. We didn't see an appreciable uptick in targets with Eli out there. He had 4 targets, caught 3 of them with one receiving yard on the day. So the passing game boost wasn't there for Saquon against Philadelphia. But Laffy, you know this with Philadelphia, the run game is pretty good for them. They do cover running backs pretty well in the pass game. So that's not the spot you'd expect necessarily to have that bounce back. But Osmo's projections look really good for Saquon. And, I get not wanting to trust him, and basically the price, you're not getting much of a discount because of the matchup. But and let's say you don't at least go with the field on him. And it kind of sucks because basically you're playing the game that every season-long player has been doing all year, where you're like, please, God, please, like, let Saquon have one decent day here. Except you're making that choice on your own in DFS, and that seems like not the best situation. But I don't see how you don't this week at his price point. If the projection is going to be that good, I mean, basically more than 3x, almost 4x projection for him. I think you just take the stab and hope at this point, and then don't be shocked if he fails, because he just has failed every single time besides those first couple weeks.
He really has. I mean, when you talk about guys that are priced similarly to him, I think that's one thing that we can take a look at. Like Alvin Kamara last week ended up being pretty popular again. That game goes off, and he was a colossal disappointment. I mean, again, and I don't want to put these guys into the same grouping, but from an ownership and pricing standpoint, they kind of have been similarly disappointing at pretty similar price points. So here's the thing. Like, you've got Barkley at right now 20%. You got Ezekiel Elliott at 10%. He's $100 more. We'll use DraftKings pricing just for the sake of argument here or context, really. You've got Aaron Jones at 73. Just talking specifically running backs. And then Chris Carson at 7,500. Honestly, man, I would rather have Carson over Barkley. And I think I would probably have Elliott over Barkley right now at half the ownership. I get it. I do. I understand it. But what's the touchdown equity with a guy like Barkley, first of all? When's the last time he's actually found the end zone? He doesn't have a rushing touchdown since week 7.
Passing touchdown in week 8.
In week 8.
He's got that going for him.
Against Detroit, right. So he's now gone 5 straight games without any form of touchdown. Is positive regression due to set in? Maybe, but like, let's just say Carson has half the ownership, or Elliott. I'm going to end up going there.
Yeah, Carson, to me, I do think is a really strong play. We've seen that defense for Carolina give up so much production just on the year against everybody for the most part in every spot. Last week, Devante Freeman got there, and now we have Rashad Penny out for the year with the ACL injury. So you know that Carson's going to get that workload. Nobody really breathing down his back in the same way that we've seen Penny breathing down Carson's neck the last few weeks. So I think I agree with you that Carson, I would say, is a stronger play in terms of just his production and the opportunity. But again, just looking at the projections, they're there. I think too, if, you mentioned earlier in the show, like, you think that Saquon's ownership may actually hold. And I would agree it holds, but I think it's not going to get to that 30% threshold, just because we were seeing in the YouTube chat right now, a lot of these guys who are regulars in our videos, like saying easy pivot, like get away from Saquon. And I think that's the thing is, like, look, he hasn't done it, but just because he hasn't done it, the volume's been there. He's still getting around 20 touches a game. He's doing that against Miami. Like, he could very easily have one of those big days. Only takes for him taking 1 or 2 big runs or breaking 1 or 2 big runs. So I like those guys. I see getting away from them, but I think if people are going to go in with that bullheaded mindset of like, yeah, I don't want to play Saquon, then you might as well just play him and hope that he's capable of doing what he did all year long last year. And this was an aberration this entire season.
For sure. And again, it is going to be strictly an ownership thing for me. If he's the chalkiest running back on the slate, I'm telling you right now, I don't think there's a need to get there in abundance. And the reason, though, isn't because he's not a fine play, but at this rate, you can't look at Carson and you can't look at Elliott, who's also, underperformed to an extent, but is similarly priced. You can't look at them and say, oh yeah, just Barkley has a way higher ceiling. Like, he doesn't this season.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. And I think too, the lack of the pass game being there, I know it's really strange that he's just not as involved this year. And again, that could change with the matchup and Eli being out there, or assuming that Eli is out there this week. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it seems like something where you have the 2 different sample sizes, where you have this season's sample size and you have last year's, and you could think about how he did last year. Nothing really materially has changed that much besides Daniel Jones this year. I think the line is fairly similar. If anything, you could argue it should have gotten better. I don't think it did, but you could argue that it should have. So I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to at least be with the field on it, even if he is like highly owned. If he's 30, 40%, it's a different equation, but at 20, I think you just hope and pray. And, I'm also not necessarily as crazy about Zeke, I guess, just because that Dallas team continues to find ways to.
Oh yeah, I'm not crazy about him. I just could make the argument that the workload is undoubtedly going to be there.
Yeah, and I think too, well, the workload has been there for Saquon, and maybe not like 25 touches, but 20 touches, I think, in this modern NFL with what we see this year, like, I'll take that in a much better matchup. Whereas the Rams defense, we saw what they did to Seattle. I think the Seattle offense is much better than Dallas' offense, or at least more reliable than Dallas's offense is. And after what they did with them, I don't know that they don't do the same to Dallas. It scares me enough where Saquon versus Miami at some point, we just see everybody get production against Miami. I'm willing to take the good matchup. And then, maybe it's squinting a little bit too much if you're trying to go to these guys in tougher matchups and go because you're just so averse to Saquon's very existence.
There's also Leonard Fournette. There's a lot of guys in this price range. Fournette, Carson, Barkley, Elliott. I guess you could throw Chubb into the mix, but just looking at this Jacksonville team, it appears as though they've given up on the season, at least on defense. But you can't make an argument that the Raiders have been any better either. This Raiders team has absolutely fallen off a cliff. You go from a team that's averaging like 25 points per game on 5 straight weeks to just being manhandled by bad teams like the Jets, crushed by the Titans, scored 3 points against Kansas City. They scored 9, but that last one was with like 30 seconds left in garbage time. They managed only 17 against Cincinnati. I think the Oakland and this Oakland-Jacksonville game actually has a pretty significant potential to shoot out because both defenses have been miserably bad, right? It's got a 45.5 total. Raiders have a 26-point total, 19.6 for the Jags, which I know that spread seems a little strange given how bad the Raiders have been. But this game in general, to me, is somewhat appealing. Leonard Fournette, despite some lack of efficiency in some of these spots, has still been getting a monster amount of work pretty much in any game. I mean, they got crushed against the Chargers, and he still saw 21 looks. Like, he's going to get involved no matter what. So I think the mid-range has a lot to offer. Now, if you're talking about some of the other running backs and ownership that you get there, what is your thought or what is your thinking on Todd Gurley? I can't imagine the ownership doesn't come up from 11% at only $6,000.
Yeah, Gurley is really hard to get a read on this year. I mean, I think, most of the Game Watch podcasts I listen to have said that he's looked pretty solid the entire year. It's really just that offensive line that just gives them issues time and again. But I guess we now have 3 weeks out of 4 where he's been over 18.5 fantasy points. And the one down week was Baltimore, which does make sense because Baltimore sends a lot of people blitzing. Dallas, a low blitz rate, only 23%. They get pressure at a decent clip, but it does seem like Gurley's getting the production. So at his price point, I do find Gurley pretty appealing. The projection that Osmo has for him really not that good, which I guess kind of surprises me a little bit. He's not going to come up, I think, in optimizers very much unless you're just really trying to get away from the higher priced guys, the Fournettes, as you mentioned, and Barkley we talked about already. So I think that's one thing that gives me some pause, but I don't hate Gurley. I just don't know that the data backs it out enough where I'm going to be actually getting him on Fantasy Cruncher. I think he's more of a guy I would get him in hand builds or lineups where I just feel like, why don't I have Gurley at all? But there's no reason not to because Dallas's defense really, I think they're one defense that on paper looks decent and every week just like keep seeing them give up production either in the pass game or the run game. And I think this week it does seem like one where Gurley should find some help because they've really been leaning on him down the stretches. The Rams have kind of gone to shit down this whole run here.
Yeah, I like him quite a bit. I mean, 27 looks, 27 actual touches last game, 23 carries, 4 receptions on 4 targets. Against Arizona, he had 20 touches. At 6K, I still don't see how I don't get to a decent amount of Todd Gurley here. I mean, if you're projecting him to get a lot of work, and I am, then it's a spot where like you'd be hard pressed to get away and go to like Phillip Lindsay at 5,600. It's funny too because Kansas City's run defense has been dreadful, but in that same breath, Phillip Lindsay is and the Broncos are probably going to be playing from behind to start this game. I know that Drew Lock looked great against Houston. I'm not going to go out and say it was an anomaly because I really haven't seen enough of the guy at the NFL level. But Vegas is usually quite accurate with this. They have the Broncos as 10-point road dogs and an 18.3 implied total. Lindsay, meanwhile, is getting the opportunities, but he's not getting as many as Gurley, and he's not really efficient at all either. So when you talk about guys that right now are projected for similar ownership at comparable price points, there's nobody I see priced around him where I say, man, I can definitely see myself getting there over Gurley, no problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree. I think to me, it's still more, I feel like I'm more in the mid 7K tier. Like I do like Carson and Barkley, I think is my top two by a pretty decent stretch. And this may be an idiot move, I feel like based on the last couple of weeks, but I don't mind the idea of going up to McCaffrey again. I'm sure we'll talk about him a little bit, but it's just, it's been a down couple of weeks for him. But I think at this time, when he has had those 2 down weeks and the ownership is starting to come down the other way, I think that's the time to consider with his price also starting to trickle downward. But yeah, I would agree. Like, I think in terms of the price point, like Lindsey theoretically makes sense. Kind of weird. Denver, I feel like they're one of very few teams that have this split, but according to PFF, run blocking, they're a 57 run blocking group, which is bad. For pass blocking, they're 72. So they've actually been doing a better job keeping Drew Lock and the various miscreants they've had at quarterback throughout the year safe, and they are helping out the running backs. I don't mind taking a stab at Lindsey's volume, but I would agree. Like, I think Gurley, in terms of having a safe workload, having, again, that 20 touch-ish range, I think that seems pretty secure. And knowing that he'll have a shot to do something with it and probably be in a competitive game where, if Denver got blown out, they have a come-down game coming off the surprise win at Houston. Wouldn't be surprising at all if Kansas City just smokes them. I mean, a very high implied total for Kansas City, a 10-point spread in that game, that could definitely get bad for Denver.
Do you have any interest when you're talking about just looking at preliminary ownership? DeAndre Washington is $4,700 coming off a really solid game, and he got the bulk of the workload in that backfield with Josh Jacobs out. Josh Jacobs, from what I'm seeing, there's a good chance that he doesn't play this week either. We're still going to wait on some injury news there. But you got DeAndre Washington. Duke Johnson's very cheap. He was targeted 14 times over his last 2 games. Only 1 carry last game, but they were playing from behind almost, immediately in that one. And then I guess the other one I'd throw out there would be, assuming that Damian Williams remains out, do you look towards, a LaShawn McCoy here? He last game had 11 carries, 3 targets, nothing insane. But they also had a pretty easy time against the Patriots. Who would have thought? I think there are a couple of cheap guys that we can touch on. I don't know if anybody, assuming Jacobs is out, is close to as favorable as Washington, especially given that McCoy only played 21% of snaps last game. You know who played 40% in that backfield?
Spencer Ware.
Spencer Ware.
Yeah. They always find ways to screw us in that backfield without fail.
Yeah, like he's
creative
back,
ways
he's back.
To their credit.
It's crazy too, because you remember Spencer Ware was supposed to get the opportunities last year.
Yes. I remember that one game.
And then it was Damian Williams. I know there was an injury, but still, like that is a backfield with Andy Reid that makes it nearly impossible to try and decipher. And honestly, I'm probably just staying away from it. But Washington played 63% of snaps in that game and was heavily, heavily involved. Now they've got a 26-point implied total, 6.5-point favorites against the Jags defense, like I said, that's just given up on the season.
Yeah, I really would love DeAndre Washington if he's in. He's a guy who I've watched for a few years and kind of waited. I thought he was going to get a better shot coming out of Texas Tech. He was a really good runner and a guy who was one of those, later. And I think he might. I don't want to misquote what round he was in, but I feel like he was either a 3rd or 4th rounder, and he was one of those guys who maybe went a little bit lower than he should have. This probably would be an easy thing to figure out, but he's a nasty runner, and we saw it in that game, and we've seen all year that Oakland does want to run the ball. They want to commit to the run. He's drafted 5th rounder in 2016. So yeah, like he's a dude who's had a good profile. If you watch his college highlight reel, he was like a really, really good runner in college. Seems like a guy who actually would probably get more notice coming out now, because we've seen guys like Devin Singletary come in with some degree of hype, even though, there are some things in terms of the combine where he didn't grade out spectacularly, not a super great spark athlete, but a guy got a ton of production in college. And DeAndre Washington can really carry this full load going against a Jacksonville team who's one of the worst run defenses in the league.
Yep.
Just keeps up giving up big games. I love DeAndre Washington. I think he's the only guy in that tier I would have a lot of faith in. I could see maybe going to Peterson just because Darius Geis is going to be out and Washington continues to want to run over and over again. But I would love Washington, whether he's a chalk player or not. I think Washington, I wouldn't say a free square, but he to me is that the guy we've seen throughout the year, the Jalen Samuels or Ronald Jones, where you really couldn't tell me like, oh, that's too much DeAndre Washington, because he looked really good. He ran the most routes. Brashaad wasn't breathing down his neck. He's going to have the full workload, it seems, as long as Josh Jacobs is out.
Okay. I think so too. If that's the case, I really have no issues paying that much for him either. And mind you, he had 14 attempts in a game that they lost by 3 touchdowns. So assuming they have a lead or it's a neutral game script, you can only assume that DeAndre Washington is going to be more more involved on the ground than he was in that last one. So I like it. Any other ownership at running back that jumps out to you right now?
Yeah, I mean, nothing that crazy. I guess Dalvin being so low owned. I know that, the Minnesota went off last week, or not went off, but had a big enough lead really where Dalvin wasn't needed down the stretch. They just went to Madison because at this point with Cook's shoulder/collarbone or whatever, they clearly want to keep him safe for the playoff run. But, the Chargers run defense really isn't that good. And the Chargers are a good enough offense where they should be able to keep it competitive. And we saw last week with Eckler and Gordon, those guys both having pretty big days. Eckler in particular having a monster day. And I think that's something where I think Cook may get more work this week. People may be scared off. His price is coming down. He's going to be under 5% owned. Like, I think people are starting to sour on these guys they rode all year long, McCaffrey and Cook. And I think, that just because it's the end of the year, just because Cook's playoff position is mostly secured, and then McCaffrey's, I guess we don't know with him, but he's had a couple down weeks. Like, these guys still were the biggest performers all year long. And I think that could be a situation where people are ignoring the long-term sample size and just focusing in on the fact that, like, yeah, last 2 weeks have been pretty bad for these guys, huh? And it's like, they still have a ton of opportunity in competitive games.
Yeah, no question. Talking wide receivers here. Let's take a look at some ownership at the wide receiver position. Anybody that jumps out at us immediately. And there's nothing crazy. There's no wild ownership. Like, nobody above 15%. Right now, DeAndre Hopkins is projected for the highest ownership at the position. And then Jarvis Landry at 14%. Looking down to the rest of these players, Odell Beckham is still up there. Dude, I don't know what to do with Cleveland right now. Baker Mayfield has been so dreadful. This passing game has been so bad that I don't know if I feel like getting burned again. I'm sure this will be the day where they all go off and Mayfield throws 4 touchdowns. And I had a ton of Odell Beckham last week. That's how it works, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think this matchup, like, I played Devlin Hodges in that spot, and Pittsburgh had no interest at all in throwing that ball. But even then, they still had success, even though they clearly did not want to move the ball, take any risk at all with Hodges because they knew they could just win a field goal kicking game in that spot. But they still had a monster day for Deontay Johnson there, and Hodges himself didn't go off, but Johnson did. And I think, Cleveland does want to go off. Like, we've seen when they want to beat up on teams, when they have the spots that they can, like when they played Miami, they're willing to air it out. They're willing to get these guys there. So I'd be willing to go back to this full stack, to be willing to go back to the Odell Beckham and the Jarvis Landry stack with Baker, because I like the spot a lot going against Arizona, giving up 300 passing yards a game. Like, it's about as good of a spot as you'll find. And, I get Cleveland the apprehension of trusting them, but there's a reason that Arizona continues to give up these big games to guys who have been adrift. Like Jared Goff goes in, he's having monster days. Tyler Higbee all of a sudden gets the confidence to have 2 straight 100-yard weeks, which is hilarious. I like Cleveland quite a bit. And yeah, and I think the Landry and Beckham ownership seems high, but the Baker Mayfield ownership is really low. And I know we're not talking quarterbacks right now, but under 5% when both of your targets are going to be over 13 and 2 of the chalkier wide receiver plays, that doesn't make sense. I think it's a spot where this stack, to me, is going to be one of the ones I'll have probably a lot this week.
I'd rather just tie quarterback ownership into wide receivers and tight ends. Perfectly fine with that, because so many of these quarterbacks are so similarly projected for ownership. There's never a big gap here between even your first and 7th, maybe a 5% gap. It's not nearly as significant as other positions. But right now, and we can kind of segue this back into wide receivers, Dak Prescott is projected for the highest ownership at the quarterback position, which is kind of fascinating given how bad this team has been recently. Amari Cooper is up there around 10%. And then Michael Gallup, he's $5,700. He's at 7.1% ownership. Where's Randall Cobb at? Cobb's at 6.
He's at 6. Yeah.
So none of them are above 10%.
Yeah, I get it with Dak. It's tough because I feel like, and you might experience this too, like it's tough to balance your team feelings, like for the team that you root for, with your fantasy interests. And for Dallas, I always end up having a little bit less because I just watch the games and I know they're going to disappoint me in some way as a fan each week. And I feel like that's sort of where I am with this one, where I see this Rams defense who is really up and down. I mean, they're giving up big games sometimes. If we all can recall the famous game, which I guess was before the trade for Ramsey, but the game against Tampa Bay where they just gave up, 50 points practically. And I feel like that's the Rams team where they give up that, and then they have weeks where they shut down the opposing team completely. And we've seen that enough times where with how Dallas has played and how they continue to play down, like it worries me that they could just completely wilt here. But I would agree, like Dak with that much ownership, he's higher owned than all his receivers. Like that's a kind of an illogical play. Dak does run, but he's not like Lamar Jackson. He's not Josh Allen, where he's going to, cut production from his receivers because he's running. So yeah, like Gallup at lower ownership, I think is pretty intriguing. Cobb, I think assuming that we get Cooper maybe getting the shadow treatment from Ramsey, I think would be appealing. So I think the passing stack for Dallas is kind of strong, but it's a lot of ownership for Dak. And I'm not as willing to go to chalk Dak as it seems like the whole field is willing to.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I need to get there either. I do like Ezekiel Elliott if he's going to come in around like 9 or 10% ownership. That to me makes a lot of sense. And I never have a problem getting to, the Amari Coopers and such, because really from an upside standpoint, it's wild. Jalen Ramsey's been okay this year, though. He hasn't been great. So I'm assuming that Michael Gallup actually sees more Jalen Ramsey here, but I don't know how much it matters. The interesting thing though is when you look at targets, let me ask you this. You're a Dallas guy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you expect Jared Goff and the Rams to be able to put significant points on the board? Because this has been a Rams team that has been wildly. The only thing predictable about the Rams is they're really unpredictable. And Jared Goff last week, very solid game outside of the 2 picks. He only threw 31 times, but threw for 293 yards in that easy win over Seattle. Blew out Arizona, 424 yards and 2 scores on 43 attempts. And then just got smoked by Baltimore, looked horrible against Chicago, terrible against Pittsburgh. Now give him credit. It's 3 really difficult matchups. It does seem like in good matchups, Goff is good to great. In tough matchups, he completely falls apart. And I don't think there's really any debating that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's been one of the things to them is that he's a very bad quarterback when he's under pressure, and this Cowboys team does get pretty decent pressure, 26% pressure rate. So they don't send a lot of blitzes, which I think is all something that Goff has struggled with. That Baltimore game being the biggest tell for that, where he just like was basically blind on the field. He couldn't see what he was doing because they just kept sending guys after him, and he's like panicking back there. So I guess the one benefit to him would be that, yeah, Dallas doesn't blitz. I think Dallas's coverage too, like it's odd because they get well-graded coverage from PFF, but then according to DVOA, they give up boosts to each individual position. So like wide receiver 1s, wide receiver 2s, wide receiver 3s, tight ends, they all give up better production than average in those spots. So it's one of those where I don't love where the things disagree. But I think that's because Dallas's defense is a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde, where they have weeks where you're like, oh, this team's pretty competent. They cover pretty well. And then you'll have weeks where you're like, wow, everybody seems like they're open on every single route. Kind of like Philly. And I think that's sort of where I would err on the side of Goff having more upside than not. But I think it gets a little more complicated. If Everett's back in there, I think that does make it a little bit tougher to figure out, because he and Higbee, I think, would be in a straight timeshare at this point. Cooks has been able to get nothing going all year because Goff just can't throw the deep ball this year, or doesn't want to, or is afraid to, whatever it may be. So I don't mind Goff in the spot. I do think the Cowboys will give up production, but I think there are going to be much easier spots to figure out, where this one to me seems like a dice roll. Like I'd rather go Gurley than the pass game, I would think.
Okay, man, I got to say, I am definitely surprised by the Higbee production. I really am. I mean, I did not see that being the case. I thought he could have some solid games and Jared Goff would target him on occasion, but what we've seen over the last 2 weeks is pretty crazy. He's ran the crazy thing too is when you look at the routes that he's run, the amount over the last 2 weeks. Excuse me. Zach Ertz has run 88. Mike Gesicki second with 73. Ian Thomas 71. Jack Doyle 69. Witten 68. Kelsey 68. Hollister 67. Higbee's down there at 57, right? 57 routes. He's running like, 28 routes per game, which is actually pretty low when you consider how often he's been targeted. He's been targeted 19 times on 57 routes. That's a lot, man. 3.91 yards per route run over that span. That's insane.
Yeah, on the year, he's got a 30% target per route rate. So that's really high. I mean, even for tight ends do tend to be on the higher end of the spectrum, but his numbers would be higher than, significantly higher than Jason Witten. He's actually, I'm thinking about, he's probably in that George Kittle tier of guys. Yeah, George Kittle targeted 29% of his routes. So right now, Tyler Higbee's been targeted on a higher share of his routes than George Kittle has. And that's one of his famous things where he's not a guy, similarly, a guy who doesn't run a ton of routes, but does get targeted pretty much whenever he's running one. So yeah, like Goff, I think it goes to the same things. Goff afraid to take risks this year. Goff looking for these safer guys, the Kupps, the Woods, the Higbees. And I just think the risk for him, though, is that if Everett's out there, Everett's going to be running half of whatever those routes are, and that's just going to make it tough. But if Everett were out again, I don't mind him because Goff just wants to get those little dink and dunks, and that makes it easy for Higbee to get these 100-yard days, it seems.
Yeah, no question. Definitely surprised me. If Everett's out at $3,900, I'm more than willing to get there. No problem.
Yep.
But getting back to, now that you broke down the Rams, the question for me is, do we think that this turns into a shootout? Like, can this game go back and forth? I tend to think it can. Whether it's Gurley or Higbee or Kupp or Woods, who appears to be the new favorite receiver for Jared Goff. And by the way, Brandon Cooks might be a top 5 disappointment of any draft pick this season. The guy was being drafted in the 4th round.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess I know what's wrong with him is that Goff doesn't want to throw it deep to him anymore. I mean, 1.2 deep targets a game for Cooks is a pretty big downtick from where he was last year. I think he was around 2 last year. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but on a per game basis, if you're not connecting and also like you're just not as efficient as an offense as you were last year, that's going to take a pretty big downtick. But at this point, like, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I honestly would have a hard time even playing Cooks at this point based on what we've seen on the Rams offense.
Yeah, I don't think I can do it either. But
yeah. And of course, like that means he's going to have like a 40
monster game. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh no. I mean, Dallas ranks 23rd in pass defense, DVOA 17th in run defense. So they've been middle of the road or worse. Meanwhile, the Rams in pass defense, you get Jalen Ramsey. I don't know. At this point, it feels like they probably should have kept Marcus Peters, but I get why they did it, and that's definitely a knee-jerk reaction on my end. But they're 12th in pass defense DVOA, 3rd in run defense DVOA. They've done a very good job of stopping the run. I do think it's possible that the Rams put up points. We just saw Chicago rain down scoring upon the Dallas Cowboys, right? That's not something that should happen. Not with how Trubisky and this offense has played. They allowed 31 points to them. 26 to Buffalo. Forget about New England. Tom Brady's been bad. The weather was terrible. 27 to Detroit, 28 to Minnesota. These are some offenses, some of them not great, that have lit them up, Spags. If that's the case, you might just see Dak Prescott like we did against the Bills, where he was forced to throw a ton, and against Chicago, where he was forced to throw a ton, 49 times each, 330 plus yards in both. You might see that again. And that's what I think is interesting about this specific matchup.
Yeah, I think overall, if you look at it like a game stack, I do think it is a fairly appealing one. And this game, I mean, both teams need this game. The Rams, I think, really, I think they still think they're in the hunt for the playoffs. I feel like they're not really. I guess that win over Seattle helps a little bit, but that's still, I don't see them getting in. But Dallas, very much in that NFC East, sub 500 hunt. So that's great for them. But yeah, like I think these are desperation mode for both squads, and that's not a data point. That's just more of a Fox announcer thing to say. But like legitimately, these are teams who are probably going to end up throwing whatever they can out there. And I think that's where you could find a lot of value. Game total under 50 implied points, 49 for these teams right now. But I wouldn't be surprised if it trickles up throughout the week, because I agree. Like Dallas's defense, I think is really not good. Looking at Jalen Ramsey's grades, he's actually grading out worse than Troy Hill on the year, according to PFF, which I did not know. But I guess it might account for the Jacksonville time too, because I feel like he was basically phoning it in for that.
No, but he hasn't been any better with the Rams.
Really? Yeah. So I haven't
maybe a game or two, but like there have been some bad games with the Rams.
Yeah, he's been I know he's been beat a couple times in games that I've watched. I guess I haven't seen him enough on a game-to-game basis watching just what he's doing and if the guys are actually open or not. But yeah, it might be the situation here where the defenses really aren't as good as people think. Rams get good pressure. Dallas gets decent pressure. I think that's the one thing that you're like, okay. But Both teams also don't control the ball that well, so there should be more plays allowed. I think that's two things. The time possession for both teams really not that good, probably because they both pass a lot. So definitely room for there to be game stack potential here. And I do think both quarterbacks, the ownership certainly much lower for Goff. I think that might be a reason to go that way, and then take the targets from the Dallas side, but go with Goff and some of his guys as your primary stack. But the game itself, I agree, like it could have some upside. And but it also like it sucks because it wouldn't be surprising if Goff could go craps the bed and Dak does the same thing he did versus Chicago or Buffalo. But
absolutely,
but that's the risk of DFS, I guess.
On the right, I mean, just look at the Saints and 49ers game. You take two offenses that are very capable of going off, that did go off.
Sure. And defense did not matter in that game,
right?
Unless you were Alvin Kamara, then it mattered too much.
Exactly. Because we do a Tuesday show where we go position by position, and Thursday we go game by game. It's fun to kind of jump around here and have a loose structure and really hit on some of the important pieces of, well, not even themes or stories, but important. I don't even know the word for it. Basically, situations or scenarios to track throughout the week, spots that we're probably going to need to take a stand on one way or another, Spags. And one of those for me, a big one that warrants discussion, is the Tampa Bay Bucs passing game. So not only is Mike Evans done for the season, right, with a hamstring injury, but Jameis Winston is expected to play through a broken thumb on his throwing hand. Yeah. So on one side, you say, hey, man, Chris Godwin with no more Mike Evans, can life get any better? And then on the other hand, you say, Jameis Winston's got a bum digit, and Darius Slay's probably going to see a lot of Chris Godwin. Does this turn into the Brashaad Perriman and O.J. Howard show? Or is Jameis Winston throwing every ball into the ground because he can't get a grip on it? I don't know what to do here yet.
Yeah, so this is one of the Beyond the Numbers things that I have this week, which I'll spoil. I love Justin Watson, and I did watch a lot of the game.
Hold on. Let me set it up for you, brother.
Let
me set it up.
No, go ahead.
We don't need structure here. Mike Evans is out for the year. We're going beyond the numbers. Is out for the year with a hamstring injury. Unheralded wide receiver Justin Watson saw 8 targets with a team-leading 91 air yards in Week 14 after Evans went down. Jameis Winston also has a broken thumb that he'll play with. Is Watson... Oh, he's going to play with his thumb? That just sounded funny. Is Watson a safe play in Week 15?
He's going to just fiddle around with that broken thumb.
Yeah, I just see him like playing with his thumb, like flicking it. Is Watson a safe play in Week 15 with the risk this situation brings?
Yeah, so look, Justin Watson.
You know what I mean, right? Like when you
he's just fiddling around it, like, oh man, I can't believe it's broken. And then he just keeps going to the traders, like, is it still broken now?
It would be funny if they say Jameis Winston is going to play with his broken thumb, and he's on the sidelines the whole game.
He's out for the game. He's going to be sitting on the sidelines.
Well, they didn't lie.
The thing is, like, can he get less accurate? Like, I think that's the question I have.
Fair point.
61% completion rate for Jameis on the year, but yeah, he was treating Justin Watson like he was Mike Evans, like he was, which is really
crazy.
Great. We talked about this before we came on the air, but 2 of my big stands last week were Devante Parker and Mike Evans, 2 players I loved, who Mike Evans had that great touchdown, then went out. So it was really great to see Mike Evans' routes being so successful against the team.
Exactly.
With a player I didn't have, but yeah, I don't know, man. I love Justin Watson in that spot. Like, I think Godwin saw double teams too, and Watson was basically just left to do whatever he wants. So was Perriman, but Perriman just didn't quite get as many looks. And I think people will go to Perriman a little bit more as a replacement. But Watson was really sneaky and kind of good at getting into holes in coverage in a way that I was surprised by. And, I love the new shiny toy, but I like the new shiny toy who's going to get volume. And Jameis, I think, is just going to keep throwing it, whether he's fiddling with his broken thumb or not. I think he's going to be out there doing it. And Detroit sucks. Like, this is one thing we talked about all year where, like, people go, like, yeah, Darius Slay, like, and Darius Slay is a fine cornerback, but, they still haven't had good results on the year, still giving up 277 passing yards a game, bad coverage grade from PFF. Like, it's still a spot where if Jameis is going to throw it, and if he's been inaccurate all year and still getting results, like maybe a broken thumb will make him more accurate. I don't know. We simply don't know.
You might be right. And Watson ran. Yeah, it would be like rookie of the year.
All of a sudden, every pass is pinpoint. He throws no picks.
Yeah, until it heals, and then it's like a 5 interception first half. That would be amazing. Yeah, we got to keep a close watch on that. If we end up being right, it's going to be spectacular.
Oh, I would love it. If this is the week that Jameis just has the perfect day.
Oh, yeah, exactly. What's a perfect quarterback rating?
158.3.
Yeah, his is going to be 160. That's how good. That's how good he's going to be.
Scale.
Godwin ran 52 routes last week. Perriman 50. Howard 37. Watson 34, but he was targeted on 8 of those. Yep. Cameron Braid 14. Mike Evans 11. He wasn't out there for more. He was out there for 23% of the snaps. It does stand the reason that he could see the opportunities here. And you know what I'd be interested to see, and I can always look this up. Like, how many of Watson's targets came after Evans went out?
So it's weird because like I was watching the game, and it's not one of those things where I'm not doing my own scorecard like I'm a kid at a baseball game doing that part, but it was like that second half was where Watson really got targeted heavily. You know what, it might be worth pulling up the Game Pass thing.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up. I'm trying to find it right now.
Bucs. That was a fun game too. That was one that we talked about on here, and like that game actually ended up being like Brissett wasn't the right quarterback to go with the stack, but that one worked out. Besides Jack Doyle, who signed his contract and decided, you know what, man, I don't want to do much more.
Yeah, no thanks.
Like, I got my money. You think I'm a scrappy hardworking white tight end, and in fact,
yeah, exactly. So okay. It appears as though, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, every single target for Watson came after Mike Evans got hurt.
Yeah, and it also helps. It's worth noting Sammy Miller was out for this one too, so maybe that changes the equation a bit because he has been a little bit higher.
Scotty Miller,
my
Get
bad.
it right. Come on, put some respect on his name.
I was looking up Sammy Miller, and there's apparently a band in the UK called Sammy Miller and the Congregation. I'm like, that can't be the right guy then.
Huh. That's an interesting band name.
Yeah, no, it sounds a little, it's British though. So I think it sounds a little bit, less racially tinged than it would be here. But Scotty Miller not being out there, I think does change the equation a little bit. I don't know his injury status for the week for Scotty Miller, but I think if he's not out, yeah, for some reason, Scotty Miller not even getting mentioned anywhere, which is weird. They promoted Ishmael Hyman to boost their thin receiving core.
Wait, what's his name?
Ishmael Hyman.
Hyman?
Hyman, yeah.
Really? Yeah,
he's bursted through. Ishmael Hyman is.
I smell Hyman. I bet he used to get that all the time.
Yeah. Let's see. It's Miller. Doubtful that Evans will be ready to go the following weekend. Scotty Miller's last 2 games, the hamstring strain, his availability is unknown. So, Hyman could be getting called up just because of Evans, but I assume Miller, why would you try out Scotty Miller right now? Why risk his hamstring? Go with Justin.
I'm with you. Why not?
Yeah.
We'll pay attention to that. But hey, all right. I can get into that, man. If you're not going to Watson, do you have interest in, even if you did, do you still have interest in Godwin? Are you cool with a team stack or a game stack here? Or, Winston, Godwin, Watson? What's your thinking outside of just Watson and at this team in general?
So I don't mind Godwin. I think the risk really is that he's going to be double teamed a lot, which and that's the thing too, is Detroit's such a bad defense that they might not even do that because they don't do that too often. And that's, sort of the issue, I guess. I'm trying to think back to some of the games this year that they've given up that are really big. I mean, Detroit's given up big games to everybody, which is the thing. So I don't know that. I think logically to me, I would think you'd want to double team Godwin. That was what the Colts did down the stretch last week, which is why Watson got those targets. But Detroit's such a dumb defense that they may not do that. So I think to me it would just be a mix of the guys here. And I think, you would want to run it back with one of the Lions. And I think Galladay's a guy who came through a little bit last week. Tougher matchup for him there, but I think this week going against Tampa Bay, still getting a lot of deep targets. I think that's what you're hoping for Galladay. But yeah, I think I don't mind going to Godwin. I think the chalk ownership on him right now just doesn't seem right because we have seen Jameis be more willing to spread the ball around too. OJ Howard was more highly targeted. Perriman had a couple of looks there. So I think there are ways to not go to Godwin and assume that he's just really shut down. But I think he's still probably the guy you want the most exposure to just because he's the best player. And, sometimes the logic does bear out. And Detroit's a bad enough defense where they may not just do what the logical move is, which is just send everybody at Godwin and make other guys beat you.
For sure. And if we're talking about Brashaad Perriman, this was somebody that I had really high hopes for once he got healthy in Baltimore. And, they really were depleted at the receiver position. Nobody, like Mike Wallace was the guy, but you didn't really expect much out of him. I thought we'd be in better shape. And he ended up just being downright dreadful. I mean, absolutely terrible, man, to the point where he got cut. So at this rate, I don't know if you can expect anything from Brashaad Perriman. Like, can you expect anything from him here? A guy that I don't know if he has a reception north of 20 yards this whole season. Of course, I can look that up, but you get my point.
Yeah, he was targeted.
He does, by the way. My fault. He actually has a bunch. So his last three games, he has 3 over 30. So, okay, turning it around.
I thought he would be it's all upside here for Brashaad Perriman. I thought he would have a decent shot at being good this year. I didn't realize, coming into the year, I think we talked about him, where I liked what I saw from him with Baker Mayfield as a quarterback. I kind of thought it was a similar construct with Jameis this year, and he just didn't get the same looks. So they all ended up going to Evans and Godwin, as they probably should, because Brashaad Perriman's Brashaad Perriman. But I think he's better than people may think overall. Like, he's kind of regressed a little bit. And I think he's got a little bit less fast this year. It seems like he put on some muscle, which has maybe slowed him down a little bit. But he was targeted. But basically, like, if you look down the stretch, and again, we're looking at the game logs for this one, but really no targets at all to Godwin down the stretch, because they were all going to Watson and to Perriman and a little bit to Howard. And then, here's the first one. The last 3 drives Godwin wasn't targeted on. He got targeted on the second one after the second half, basically. That's, I think, the only target he got in the second half, it looks like.
Yeah, I think so too.
So Godwin, I think that's the risk that I was talking about, where, like, if Detroit sees that and goes like, we should do what they did and just let these other guys try to win, and then take Godwin away, then that would be the risk. But again, Detroit's a stupid defense. So, like, it's, I wish it were easier to lay out like this, where it's like, stupid defenses sometimes do smart things too. But I think Detroit's just so bad where it just wouldn't shock me if they just play him straight and go like, we'll let Godwin beat us. And then Godwin goes for 200 yards.
Philadelphia Eagles have lost Alshon Jeffrey for the year. We know that Deshaun Jackson's out for the year. And as far as Nelson Aguilar's status goes, we will still have to see. He's now up in the air for Sunday's game against Washington, according to head coach Doug Peterson. This could leave us with Greg Ward, who is not someone you're going to see a lot of deep opportunities. However, he did have a target from like 20 yards out in the end zone that was a semi-tough ball. I think it got tipped, but he did get a look in the end zone. He was targeted 9 times last game. Alshon Jeffrey went out pretty early. He's literally always hurt, and it's just, at this point, it's out of control. As an Eagles fan, I'm tired of it. But how about somebody like J.J. Arcega-Whiteside? So when you have, he literally made the best catch of any receiver on the Eagles this season.
You had the over-the-shoulder one?
Yeah, and that speaks volumes. Not just that it was a good catch, but that nobody has made tough catches this season, like anybody. So Aguilar was out. Alshon Jeffrey did not see a single target. Or I'm sorry, he saw 2 targets early on and then was out. Greg Ward saw 9. Arcega-Whiteside saw 3. And then with the snap counts, you've got Aguilar out. Alshon Jeffrey played 22. Hollins was cut. He's terrible. Jordan Matthews is gone. Greg Ward played 87% and Whiteside played 90%. It was to the point where Josh McCown was actually ready to come in as a receiver. I'm serious about that too. Zach Ertz led the way in targets, but J.J. Arcega-Whiteside led the Eagles going back beyond the numbers with 51 routes in Week 14, only saw 2 targets. He's expected to play on Sunday as possibly the last outside receiver standing for Carson Wentz with a strong matchup against Washington. Is he even in consideration this week for you, Spags? And let me ask you this too. Let's talk about Greg Ward and Zach Ertz and kind of throw this whole matchup into this conversation about Whiteside.
Yeah, so Whiteside, it was odd to me that he just barely got any targets in that game. Like, I think that's sort of what freaks me out a little bit with Arcega Whiteside is that like he just has not been involved on the year. And this is annoying. It's like because his name is JJ with no dots in one of the things that I'm pulling, and he's
Yeah,
not.
I know. It's annoying.
So I can't see his targets per route right now, but I know they're very low. And you could just look in the game logs for that game where he only had 2 targets, even though he ran 50? I forget what it was. Whatever many routes he ran a lot of routes and basically just saw no targets throughout that entire game. And that is one thing that Osmo has pointed out a lot of times to look at is that if a guy's just not getting targets, he got 51 routes he ran and he had 2 targets. Like that's so scary that the guy's just running routes and then Wentz isn't even looking his way. Like I think that's sort of the concern. Whereas Ward, as you mentioned, 47 routes, saw 10 targets. Like that's a guy who's actually getting targeted. So Arcega Whiteside has had deep targets all year. He has gotten those deep throws downfield sporadically, but if he's not getting them enough, like I don't know what you do. I think game planning, if I'm the Eagles this week, I would certainly think like, yeah, we have to use Arcega Whiteside, get him downfield because Washington just gives up that production over and over and over again. But like, do I trust it? I think that's sort of the thing that I'm struggling with, where I really don't trust that he's going to get that workload necessarily. But I think at a near minimum price for him, like no Jeffrey out there. If Aguilar were to miss, I think if Aguilar misses, that's the thing that I would find to be the most important. Because if Aguilar is in, that's one guy who Wentz actually will throw to and does throw to at a decent rate. If he's out there, I think Arcega Whiteside gets less valuable. Greg Ward, I could still see getting enough work, but I think I'd be more inclined to go with Wentz, Aguilar, and Ertz at that point. But if no Aguilar's in, I think that's when you're going like, fine. If Arcega Whiteside is literally the only guy they came into the year with as an outside receiver, he's the only guy out there left. Like it's either him or Josh McCown. I guess I'm going Arcega Whiteside in that case.
Yeah, I hear you. It's really tough to get away from Ertz at $6,000 like that. He's underpriced. There's no question he's underpriced in this spot. They've got nobody left, but they're also playing. This is what I like. They're playing a Washington team that's going to really struggle to move the football themselves. So right now we have Ertz at 9.9%. There's no doubt in my mind that comes up significantly. Think about it. Even if their offense has trouble moving the ball, it's not like Washington's going to have sustainable drives. If they did, I would be shocked. And you've already lost Darius Geis now, who is one of the only playmakers on this team. I think Chris Thompson's interesting on the other end. I actually don't hate that, but you have to think that Ertz again sees an insane amount of opportunities, another double-digit target game, just based on what needs to be done. He ran 50 routes last game. That's more than any other tight end by 7.
Yeah, Ertz to me would be the best play that you would want here for sure. I mean, Washington also giving a 27 boost, or actually 26% boost to tight ends according to DVOA on Football Outsider. So that's a pretty good matchup for him. And as you mentioned, like he was really the only guy getting targeted out there over and over and over again. And Washington's not good enough to stop that. I think that's one thing where that's a crappy defense where you know what's going to happen in this spot where they are not going to be able to stop Ertz. They haven't stopped anybody at all in the pass game all year. So I really would like Ertz a lot regardless of the situation. But I think now that we know that Jeffrey's not out there, like Jeffrey to me has been the one guy that's kind of inhibited what Ertz does. So Ertz to me, under 10% ownership, even with his price up, like he and Wentz, like he's Wentz's only hope to keep this offense moving if we don't have Aguilar out there. And I think that's why, Ertz to me looks like one of the best plays of the week, really overall.
Of the 6 tight ends above 5K, you've got Kelsey, Kittle, Kelsey against Denver, Kittle against Atlanta, Ertz against Washington, Waller against Jacksonville, Hunter Henry against Minnesota, and Hooper against San Francisco. Ownership right now, Kittle's up top, then Kelsey, Waller, Ertz, Hooper. Henry's down there a bit further. I still think Ertz, I think this slate will lock with Ertz being your highest owned tight end. But nevertheless, many of these guys are pretty reasonably priced. The difference between Ertz and Kittle for me is it's very seldom are you going to see 10 targets for Kittle. He hasn't seen 10 targets in a game. He hasn't seen 9 targets in a game since week 1. Ertz could go out there and see 15 targets and it would shock nobody. Darren Waller is one of only a few options on this team. He's come back down to earth, but like I said, I kind of like this Oakland offense. And I think his ownership is going to come down significantly throughout the week. Kelsey against Denver's fine, but I'd rather have Ertz, and Kittle against Atlanta is solid for sure. But I'd rather have Ertz if they're going to be identical ownership.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen Ertz have really big days without even catching a touchdown, or at least fairly big days without even catching a touchdown. And I think that's, to me, another thing, like you mentioned, just being peppered with targets. 13 targets last week. Didn't have a great game against Miami. That was the one where Ertz had his hamstring issues, and they also just, I guess they did need him more than they realized, but it didn't seem like they needed him. And then ended up losing that game. But a lot of that work went to Alshon Jeffrey there, but Jeffrey's not out there. So if Jeffrey's not out there, there's nowhere else to really go reliably. 14 targets the week before in week 12 against Seattle. Like, it's a huge workload that, as you mentioned, none of those guys are getting on a week-to-week basis. So Ertz, to me, would be the tight end play of the week by far, just because they need this game. They need him, and there's just nowhere else to throw, really, especially if Aguilar isn't out there.
I'm with you. Other tight ends that you find interest in here? I mentioned to you earlier that I think Higbee is solid if Gerald Everett's out, and I still don't mind him at sub 4K. Is there anyone else that jumps out at you?
Higbee, I think OJ Howard, I'm a little bit curious about, even though, we know how that's gone, but did get some more work last week, as we talked about with the Evans issue. So that's something where I could see getting there a little bit, but I think Higbee really is the one that I would be the most into, just scanning through to see if there's maybe Njoku, but I feel like that's still, like, his price is too high for a guy who's been hurt most of the year. And the spot is Arizona. So I guess that's why it didn't work out for Vance McDonald last week, but that was, again, a game where Hodges didn't want to throw. So I don't mind going back to Njoku a little bit this week. Though, actually, I don't even know how many routes he ran. That's a curious point. But Njoku is going to get the price up. It looks like he's 4,300 on DK, which seems stupid. He ran 9 routes last week, too. That's not a lot.
Oh, no, not a lot at all.
No.
Worth pointing out that Carson Wentz targeted receivers, he didn't have them, but receivers 14 total times, 9 went to Greg Ward. He targeted tight ends 24 times, 13 to Ertz, 6 to Goddard, and 5 to Perkins. That's kind of concerning. Not Ertz, of course, but the fact that Perkins saw only 1 fewer target than Dallas Goedert. This is only the second game he's even been active all season long. So I think I'd be a little bit more concerned about Goddard here in a game where you would think, like, hey, Dallas Goedert's got to get a significant amount of work here. He ran 28 routes, but Perkins ran 20. Instead of Goddard being out there for most of those, Perkins took a bunch away from him. So for me, it's Ertz or nothing at Philadelphia. Spags, before we head out, can you tell the people how you get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum membership? What a deal.
Oh, platinum. The platinum is really the thing you're looking for there, because you don't want gold or bronze or silver, whatever.
Okay.
That platinum is where it's at. But if you go to awesemo.com/join right now and use that promo code NFL strategy, you get half off your first month of all those packages at awesemo.com/join. And we even have packages of those $3.95 a week on there. So go to awesemo.com/join right now, get that half month free with the promo code NFL strategy, or find the weekly packages as low as $3.95 a week. Either way, there's an option that'll work for you. And then, you know what? That even gets you on the pathway to becoming a baller more easily, I would think.
I think it does.
It doesn't make you a baller. You're just like on the road. You're walking down the yellow brick road to becoming a baller.
Now, that's how a professional does a read, let me tell you. You got anything else before we head out?
No, actually, wait. Might have had one more beyond the numbers. No,
we did. I wasn't sure if you'd want to do that because we already talked about it.
Yeah, we already got him. Yeah, play DeAndre Washington as the beyond the numbers.
Yeah, we could. You mentioned it earlier, but he had 14 carries, 7 targets last week, 21.6 fantasy points. And if Jacobs is out, he gets this Jaguars awful run defense that's allowing 5.3 yards per carry with a 63 run defense grade from PFF. We'll put it simply. The way that you phrase it, is he a lock with his price up and the matchup at home against the Jags? Would you lock him in with Jacobs out?
Yeah, if Jacobs is out, I will have a heavy amount of DeAndre Washington. I think he's a smash play and a guy he's one of these guys who's going to, if you don't have him in your fantasy league, he's going to ruin that. I think he's the dude this year who is going to be a guy I will roster pretty much every week. If Jacobs is out down the stretch, Washington just is a nasty runner who's getting a shot. And this week in particular is the best possible matchup you'll find for him.
Kind of like Damian Williams last year after everything transpired.
Yeah, not quite the prolific offense, but still good enough, and they commit to the run, and that's all you could ask for.
Hey, Jalen Richard, I mean, Damian Washington seemed like the clear option there with Jacobs out. I don't think that was a big surprise to anybody at all. But when you look at the opportunities in terms of snaps, Richard played 38%, Washington played 63%, and my guess is that if this game is a more favorable game script and they're playing with the lead or tied or close, that Washington gets even more work. So I'm with you. I absolutely love him there. And I appreciate, as always, you guys hanging out with us here on the Strategy Show. Be back with Sal Vetri tomorrow, breaking down everything for Week 14, game-by-game analysis. We are sponsored by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. And hey, if you enjoy the show, you want to help support us, hit us with a thumbs up, like the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell as well. It makes it so we can keep putting out free content here on the YouTube each and every day. We'll be back with you tomorrow on the Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports.